Don't look to your right. These were the 5 words that played a foundational role in my loss of innocence. But being a 9-year-old in 2012, I didn't let my mother trample over me. I looked right anyways, tilted my head in complete disobedience and observed. Then my mom snatched my phone from within my hand and dropped it on the car floor alongside of her own. I looked to my right again, but this time to see a glaring, shiny gray circle. I looked up a little more, and I'd seen a black ski mask with rips all over it and heard the echo of the words, Sona, 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 meaning gold, gold, gold. I was slapped by reality when I was faced by a man who cocked his gray gun and pummeled it on the window and yelled once more, Sona, Sona, Sona. My mom didn't even flinch. And from within her pocket, she pulled a Nokia out, saving my iPhone as well as hers, which she had dropped on the car floor. He yelled Sona 3 times again, as if he didn't know any other words in Urdu. He placed the Nokias that we gave him into a bag of valuables and pulled out a watch to check the time, where he would then depart, as the traffic once again began to move. I hadn't moved in the entirety of this situation. I was frozen in time, frozen in my thoughts as to how a person could be this cruel. An anger arose in me that motivated me to want to hunt him down. This man who was so different from me and my family. It startled me. Now, what I experienced was a crime, but other people in the same country of Pakistan experienced something far worse in the embodiment of terrorism. This led me to examine how people become distinctly radicalized. And it's in my belief that radicalization starts with isolation. People become isolated to the point that the only ideas or thoughts that are put out are all homogenous. And when this happens, or when people talk in an echo chamber, it becomes easier to dehumanize the other. And this is what ultimately leads to isolation that can make the dehumanized person become radicalized. A clear example of this can be seen in the division of East and West Pakistan. East Pakistan was arising for independence and developing new governmental ideals, seeking new standards of life. Instead of advocating for consensual ways of running the government, West Pakistan's government had other plans. It was mass murder. Recalled as Operation Searchlight, West Pakistan led the mass execution of East Pakistanis who opposed the new government. This massacre resulted in 10 million refugees fleeing to India and an estimated 300,000 to 3 million deaths. There was no listening to people's concerns, no distress, no looking back, but pure savagery and pure intentions of wiping anyone who opposed their agenda off of the face of the earth. Naturally, those who were targeted allowed their beliefs to be emboldened and isolated within themselves. They allowed themselves to firmly attach to what they believed in. Finally, in the end, East Pakistan would become independent, splitting totally from West Pakistan and becoming Bangladesh. What we can take away from this example is that military operations to try and force assimilation do not work. The violence that was used served only to deepen the divide, the violence and the radicalization. Fast forward a couple of decades and ethnic terrorism arises again, but this time with the Taliban. USA and Pakistan partner up in a common interest of uprooting terrorism, except the same technique in East Pakistan is used, armed warfare. It was as if we hadn't even learned our lesson. USA and Pakistan would implement drone attacks that would be put out into tribally administered areas. Now, imagine being a child and waking up just to see bombs dropping just as rain would. You're stripped away from education, a social life, and the essence of life itself. From birth, you're doomed and designated for a terror-filled life. Some reckon that it's right for the reasons being that leaders of those terrorist organizations would die. But simultaneously, innocent men, women, and children would all die alongside of those terrorist leaders. Let's ask ourselves, was it really worth it? As a Pakistani, as a human, I've come to the conclusion that military operations are never the solution. We've conducted them in Balochistan, Sindh, all areas of Pakistan, but time after time, they create more and more isolation. by establishing an us versus them mentality. It's this line of thinking that leads to radicalization, which in turn leads people to commit more acts of violence, which dehumanizes others, creating more isolation, and again, more radicals. However, listening and cooperation are more importantly the answer. Instead of seizing tribes through military, we must win them over politically. No person wants to live or spend their life being unsure of whether they will live for another day. We talk about love and we talk about peace as sort of abstract concepts that have yet to be arrived to. We fail to realize and we fail to understand that these concepts don't begin with governmental actions defining or defending them with weapons, but begin with us and the simple precautions that we take. Whether it's that we start having conversations with people who are not similar to us, or even paying a charity of a smile to a person we don't know. Through our encounters with others, we display compassion and form a baseline of familiarity. When we listen to someone, we give worth to them. They, in turn, are more apt to give worth to us, to ultimately form a bond unlike any other. We mustn't let another person fall into the void of isolation. But let's return for a moment to the cocked ray gun being pummeled against my window. What if instead of seeing someone else on the other side of that glass, I saw a reflection of myself staring back at me? Here was this man, this boy, who must have been my age, almost 16, 17, maybe even 18. He was just about the same height as me. He had black hair, brown shoes. We probably even spoke the same language, Urdu. Had a shared national history, maybe even similar music interests. What if he had more similarities to me than differences? What if we had that conversation on that day? Or what if that conversation was to be held 1 week or even 1 year back? Maybe in a different world, where he'd been greeted with compassion instead of violence, acceptance rather than isolation. Maybe in that world, we could have been friends. Thank you.